Welcome to another episode of Unveiling the System. This is Jessie Czebotar, and this episode is titled Constitutions, Thrones, and Altars. In this episode, we continue on with our understanding of the Luciferian Brotherhood system and their sovereign military order. We're going to continue to look at their constitutions and how the constitutions are connected to the governance of the system as a whole, and how that connects to, their established rules, laws, and bylaws that they are going to be subservient to above our own country, the United States of America, or other countries where they may be established. So previously, in the first two series of Unveiling the System, I get into the structure of the system and how at the very top you have the Mothers of Darkness. Underneath them, you have the Council. Let me go to a screen share here. Just give me 1 second. This series you are going to find on my website, kingdomlivingwithjessie.com. And I encourage you to watch the newest videos in that series, which are shown here, the Princes of Jerusalem and the Council. There's a part 1 and a part 2 to that. Those precede the episode that we're doing today. You can also find my work, my affidavits, and other videos, reports that I've put out on timothycharleshomeseth.com, as well as my Congress petitions. Again, you can find that on timothycharleshomeseth.com. A resource that we'll be utilizing today is a book titled Initiates of the Flame by Manly P. Hall. That book is used at the upper orders of the system to convey certain terminology as well as symbols, and is meant to stir the layers within those symbols and help people to understand the contracts that they represent between the physical and the spiritual worlds. So as we get going today, we're looking at the beginning layers of the council. In my series, I talk about the degrees, how, on the Brotherhood side and the sovereign military order side of the system, you're going to have individuals that will be studying, reflecting, going through ceremonies, rituals in connection with the circle groups that they sit in. These circle groups are going to be connected to upper level leaders within the Luciferian Brotherhood and Sovereign Military Order. And in the past, I've broken down the degrees where from the first to the third degree, you have the entry levels into Freemasonry. Then the fourth degree transposes into the 15th degree. And so all of these degrees up till 30 all fall in that spectrum between the 15 to the 30 degrees when you're looking at the Brotherhood side of the system. And then you see past the 30th degree, they're on their way to the next degrees of illumination in the Brotherhood side, which are going to be 60 degrees. Then you have 90, 180, and 360. So it's important to point out, that when we talk about the beginning levels, entry levels of the councilmen, those entry levels are going to start at this 15th degree, which is the Knight of the East or Sword or Eagle. You also will have the Princes of Jerusalem, which their symbol is going to be your scales of justice. And then you'll have the Knights of the East and the West, and their symbol is shown here. And then you have the Knight of the Rosicrucians. Then once you get up past up to the 33rd degree, you go from a Holy Knight of Kadash into the Inspector General, role, which is connected to what they're going to call the Supreme Council. And we'll get into the terminology and the symbols for these things. Um, so, in my past two episodes, The Princes of Jerusalem, I broke down their symbols they begin to use at the lower levels of the council. I also began to break down, that they have a constitution. In fact, they have several constitutions. Those constitutions come into play and are connected to our Constitution for the United States of America. Together, you have three constitutions in operation. The other two, that those who are part of the Brotherhood system and the and the Sovereign Military Order, they're going to be subservient to the other two constitutions over this constitution, even though, this constitution will be clearly seen, the other two will not be seen and will be behind the scenes. So we're going to get into some of the symbology with that. A constitution defines the scope of power and authority. It serves as a supreme law of the land. And, what does supreme law mean? Let me go to a whiteboard here quickly. Give me 1 second to stop this share and go to a new one. So that term supreme is something that ties into the quadrant jurisdiction within the system. When I talk about the system, I usually represent it this way. You have the Luciferian Brotherhood, the government side, and you have their sovereign military. Together, both parts of the system become the seal, that seal being the sign or the star of Solomon, the Star of David, the sign of Israel. And that gets into the Leviathan system and the Sanhedrin being those at the very top of the Leviathan system. Now, at the very top, as we begin to look at jurisdiction and authority, you have it split into kind of two parts. You've got the United States and you have the rest of the world. Each of those being split into four quadrants, with a north, a south, a east, and a west. And then each of those four quadrants will be broken down into further jurisdictions, which are called, their regional jurisdictions. And so at the very top, you have the five mothers of darkness, and those, you have one of those women who, that was my role, my position in the system before I got out, understands the entire operations worldwide for the Brotherhood system. That's part of the information you're getting in this series, the unveiling of the system. Underneath the mothers, you have those that are known as the councilmen. The main council is made up of 300 seats. Each of those councilmen will be assigned to a quadrant either in the United States or internationally. Now, underneath them, you're going to have a position. The next command structure in this system are those that will be considered quadrant leaders, and those are going to be your grand high priests and priestesses. And those positions are going to be comparable as well to two positions on the sovereign military side. At the very top of the sovereign military, you have those that are called protectors. They're going to take an oath when they turn 5. That oath is going to be in connection to spiritual beings that they're that they're subservient to or working in alliance with. And they're going to be assigned that your protectors will, their job is to protect the very top structures of this system. That's their job as the military for this system. And your protectors are going to oversee the quadrant leaders in the sovereign military, the regional leaders, and those that are known as knights. So underneath the protectors, you have the quadrant position, which will be signified like with a straight line, almost like a cross, but instead of a single crossbar, it's a cross with three cross lines. And their position is going to be known as supreme preceptor. So supreme is a term that you'll see in connection as well as grand to those who have quadrant jurisdiction. So your grand high priest will be assigned to a quadrant, either internationally as well as in the United States, as well as your supreme preceptors. They'll oversee sovereign military knights. They'll be assigned to oversee a quadrant and oversee those who have regional rule over those quadrants, which are going to be your preceptors. And their sign looks like a cross with two crossbars. So that's kind of what we're going to begin to look at, is the connection between your councilmen and their authorities. Your councilmen can be individuals who are grand high priests. It also can consist of individuals who are connected to the supreme preceptors within their sovereign military order. So let me go to a different screen here quick. And we're going to go back to looking at the constitutions. So, as we begin to look at these constitutions, writing, layout, all of that, putting things into a format is very important to them. And it's not done idly. It's not just a piece of paper. It's not just a scroll. For them, it has intention. And within the system, you have where they're going to establish things that are connected, that are connecting the spiritual and the physical world together. And, behind it, they're going to use symbols, use geometry, use placement of words to establish hidden contracts that they are subservient to. So, the Constitution is the highest legal authority over a nation and its people. It establishes structures and foundations of governance, rights, and how both, the governance and the rights are regulated. The Constitution is considered the ultimate authority. And, as we look into this, the Constitution is established, meaning that it's going to consist of the Constitution itself, which is our rights, the federal laws, treaties, and these are the supreme law of the land. In cases of conflict, federal law is trumping state law. So why I'm showing this view is because I want you to just kind of see the layout. They start on the complete right side of the piece of paper, and then kind of towards the middle, you start to see articles, and you see the articles emphasized, the word article, and you see the Roman numerals. As you get to the end, you see those articles and those Roman numerals, and then we see they align with the first row of signatures, and then you have the second row on the side, leaving a complete blank here. And I would propose that they are symbolizing certain structures that go back to Solomonic magic. Let me go to the whiteboard again here. When you're looking at Solomonic magic, they have three, how they'll represent that is with three lines or three colonnades, like you'll see three Roman columns. This middle line often can also be symbolized as your tree of life. When it's symbolized that way, you'll see like a heavenly or a half star. You might see an angelic entity up here. You'll see a man here, and that man will have his arms outstretched like your Christ on the cross. Then you'll see the man standing on top of a woman, and that woman is standing on top of a Leviathan down here. So whenever they see these line contracts, they will see layers in everything in their symbology. So they understand that that baseline represents that tree of life, representing, the ascending man into his godhood, standing above the woman who has made her contracts with the Leviathan, and they see, it's implied that you have the two support columns there on the side, those support columns having names. In the Bible, in your Bible, you're going to find those support columns called your Baal and your Ashtaroth poles. Then you'll see in Masonry that they're going to be called your Boaz and your Jachin poles. You'll also see that in scripture according to the temple that King Solomon built. So, those that practice the Solomonic magic, it's very common for them to call those poles the Boaz and the Jachin poles, representing power and establishment, kingship, as well as priesthood. That's what the names Boaz and Jachin mean. One represents the priesthood, the other represents the king and governance. In the Golden Dawn, you're going to see those two poles called the Neptune and the Solomon poles. Now, in the Golden Dawn, they're going to bring out more of the seraphim, the angels, the planets, but the symbology, it all means the same thing. What they want is you to believe that they're separate religions, separate beliefs, but they're not. They're all the same religion, same beliefs. They just find different ways to represent the same images and to communicate about those images so that those outside of their circle groups think that they're separate, that they're not all the same, that they're not connected to the same beliefs, the same structures, the same hidden knowledge. So that's one of the ways that they've kept their knowledge separate. So in our Constitution, when we see things written a certain way, they're highlighting their secret knowledge. And, it's meaning that, they're connecting to other things within that symbology to, that they're going to recognize, but the rest of us are not going to automatically see that. So, with this, there's going to be symbols that we're going to see that they're all going to connect to that. Um, you know, all of this within the Constitution representing a few key things that they're, again, it's going to be connected to their hidden knowledge, connected to justice established, in our executive, our legislative, and our judicial branches, connected to liberty, connected to wisdom, also known as Sophia, and connected to freedom. Now, within the system, you constantly have an equilibrium that they're going to have in effect, which basically breaks down to you have a light side of the system and you have a dark side of the system. So within this, in my episode on Unveiling the System, the Mothers of Darkness, I get into how, four of those five Mothers of Darkness, they each mother is also seen with a dark side and a light side name. So justice, liberty, wisdom, and freedom being connected to four of those mothers' light side names or titles. And then you have their dark side names, which are going to be connected to the names uh, that connect to the four queens of hell, which are Lilith, Egret, um, Naamah, and then you have Iseth or Isis. Um, so, all of these things are going to be hidden. They're going to understand at the upper levels all of the hidden imagery. For them, you know, these three lines, all of this imagery connects to the governance of, the light side titles, the dark side titles of those mothers who are at the very top, and all of that connecting to sigils, um, where you have the sigil of Lilith and the sigil of Ashtaroth representing their thrones, their altars, to Lucifer and to the other major principalities, powers, and authorities. Um, so we'll get into more of that here in a moment. Um, so let's take a minute here to look further. Let me go to another screen share as we continue to look at the constitutions and the meaning behind them. These constitutions are established as supreme law. What does that mean? It refers to the highest legal authority within a nation, typically enshrined in a country's constitution. So it's going to establish the fundamental principles, rights, and governmental structure, and serves as a foundation upon which all other laws and regulations are built. Um, so it's considered a supreme law of the land, supreme being connected, as we showed earlier, to quadrant rule, authority, and jurisdiction, both in the United States as well as internationally. Um, this is going to be established, as we brought out, and, underneath this, behind this, you've got the three colonnades representing, their belief in Solomonic magic. Um, that Solomonic magic is going to represent thrones of, ultimately your mothers of darkness and your councilmen who serve underneath them. Your mothers of darkness being the women, the five women that are going to communicate directly with Lucifer to get his orders for this Luciferian Brotherhood and their sovereign military order. So their light side names being you have, one mother who will be justice, one who will represent liberty, one who will represent wisdom or Sophia, and one who will represent freedom. Each of them having their signs, their symbols, which I break down in that episode of the Mothers of Darkness, representing their scope of authority and the different signs that will be used for that authority. You also have their dark side names, which are going to connect to Lilith, and then so you have Lilith, and then you have the others, which are going to be Egret. You'll have, Egret, and then you're going to have Naamah and Isheth, which is another name for Isis. Um, So in that, what it's really getting to, and here we see one of their base books that is foundational, um, in Solomonic magic and the teaching of their geometrical shapes and contracts. You have the Kabbalah of the Golden Dawn. And we see, even on the front cover, we see the seal. It's common for them to put in gold certain images on the fronts of books that they consider living books, meaning that within that book, it's not just going to be words, that it's a book that you're meant to reflect on, because that book is going to connect to the spiritual world, and it's going to have contracts. It's going to be considered a living book because there'll be layers to the knowledge within it. And, based on your level, your position, you'll be brought into the truths of those layers and what they mean and what they represent. Seals on the cover are also meant to keep things in or keep things out. Um, they're very purposeful. And we see in this imagery beyond, that sign of Israel here, you see the base Kabbalah tree represented with the 9 circles here, the Kabbalah ladder. And then behind that, we see here's that single line contract representing that tree of life. So that single line contract is automatically implied in the seal of Israel, as well as in the Kabbalah tree. You see kind of the overlapping. And then your supports are seen kind of hidden over here, representing those 3-line contracts. Now, why I show this is because, even in some of their imagery here, this would be where that main line, single line contract is, and over here would be where you would have your 2 supports. And you see how, you've got a base that goes here, which is often their sign of the cross, representing the north, the south, the east, and the west. But you also have contracts that are taken at the corners, which, create an X, which we talk about in the other episodes. And these contracts are connected to the dark side names, the queens of hell, while you have your um, main contracts, which are represented here, represented by your north, your east, your south, and your west. Those go back to your encampments of Israel and represent, your base contracts with the light side system names for the mothers. So, all of their imagery is going to represent different things to them. So here we can see it a little better. The words that are in this book are literally the contracts that they make with certain entities. So, here you can see Lilith. What does it say? The wife of Asmodai. Well, who's Asmodai? Asmodeus is one of the top military generals in Lucifer's army. And you have, these contracts that are made. We also see as Samael and Asmodai here, like when we talk about the quadrant leaders, and you've got that cross symbology, that straight line, and then you see, you know, the 2 lines for the regional leaders. That represents this contract, the contract with Samael, the contract with Asmodai. When you have a 3rd line in there, that represents an additional contract with Ashtaroth. So, all of their symbology literally shows their contracts. With your night groups, you'll see that straight line. If you see, the straight line and the cross line is up high, it represents that those night groups have taken their contract with Samael. When you see, the cross and you've got that cross line down low, that means the contract is with Asmodai or Asmodeus. And when you see the cross line straight in the middle, that represents that contract, their additional contract with Ashtaroth. So you can know which entities, they're worshiping with that. And, here you can see, right over here is Agarat. Then you've got your others. You've got Naamah and then Ishtath here, or Lilith. And this goes to, you see Lilith's name actually twice, Lilith or Isis, but this goes to different formations that they use for the governance, where you get more the scarf or the mantle up here, the mountain, the sunshine, representing, which divine symbol are they going to be under payment wise. This one, your chalice, representing again, the thrones, the altars that they're going to worship at. So, these together represent one altar they're going to worship at, these represent another. Thus, like in your masonry, you get the compass symbol representing, that they're still going to have Ashtaroth contracts with their night groups, but at the very top, they also have additional contracts where they fall under the sigil of Lilith. When you see the chalice in their symbology, or what looks like the U or the V, that representing further contracts that are connected to the established altars of Ashtaroth. So all of that, gets into different things for them. This again, just being another way to, represent their beliefs that you've got a light side. They keep that equilibrium. You've got, it looks good. It all looks like it's Christian, looks like it's under Christian concepts. Your Jesus in the arms of his mother Mary, right? But whose head are they raising up in that? You've got this imagery where all of a sudden they're raising another head above the head of Christ. That's why they put Christ in the infant form in the arms of Mary, because it raises Mary's head up above Christ and, represents the divine female, going back to these ancient contracts versus really representing just the mother of Jesus. Um, and, here you see it's easiest to see an Ashtaroth symbol, but you've got, three thrones or seats here. You've got an additional, that are represented down below. And, you see this would be that middle line contract, but it stops here in the middle. Why? It's because, it's literally representing a seat of authority and power, an altar that Ashtaroth sits on, a throne. And that's why you'll see in a lot of the Masonic lodges, they'll do this star symbology, and you'll see, this base shape here, because that's where they'll put the throne of Ashtaroth. So, all of their symbology is going to connect back to the sigils of these spirit beings, which represent their contracts, their authorities, their jurisdiction given by God. Now, further, it gets into your top orders of the system, which you're going to have three main orders at the top of the system that are represented. In the middle, you'll have a circle or a flame, that flame representing that single line contract. And then you'll have the two support colonnades on the side that in this form will be represented as the wings. The middle one representing your order of Melchizedek, the wing towards the east representing your order of the Golden Dawn, and the wing towards the west representing your order of the Phoenix. Those being the top three orders within the Luciferian Brotherhood system. So it gets further, you could have beyond, beyond this imagery with the wings and the circle, your order of Melchizedek may also be seen as a genie lamp, a lamp with a flame coming out of it. And you also would maybe see your wings. Your order of the phoenix is going to be represented as a phoenix bird with two wings, while your golden dawn is going to be represented as an eagle with wings. And those birds will either be black, golden, or white, all of it connecting to different structures within the system. So these are their geometrical contracts. What they go back to, the three colonnades in Solomonic magic, is they go back to a scripture passage um, that, oh, sorry, not that one, that scripture passage being connected to, sorry, let me go back to the book of Exodus, chapter 14, verses 19 through 21, where you see, Moses, God sent Moses to deliver Israel. They've come out of the land of Egypt, out of the land of bondage, and now they find themselves at the Red Sea. The Lord tells Moses to raise up his staff, and these wings represent that raising up of the staff. And as that happens, what happens, you get a straight line path through the Red Sea, and you get the water parting on the two sides, representing the power and the might of God. Now, within Solomonic magic, those three verses are the only three verses in all of the Torah where, when written a certain way, you end up with all 72 names of the entities that King Solomon documented in the 72 Keys of Solomon. So that's why these three verses are seen as powerhouse verses, because they represent the authority, the power of God, but they also represent the name of all of the entities that are in Lucifer's army, in those written in and kept in those 72 Keys of Solomon. So you've got, the single line where written a certain way, you've got all those names, and you've got the other two written a certain way, you've got all those names representing, the angelic, fallen angelic army. So that's why it's so important to them. And the hidden symbology in that is that, because they're written a certain way, you will always end up with a hidden S symbol, which represents the serpent, the Leviathan, Lucifer. So that hidden S symbology, they will use sometimes looking like a winding road in their Kabbalah books. You'll see the theology and the belief around the winding road, that coming back to that symbology of the snake. You also see it in the Lebensborn program, where you'd have the three pillars, almost looks like a S, like your money sign, but instead of just two, lines through the money sign, you see three. That is representing Solomonic magic. Their Lebensborn programs, their spell for multiplicato, for multiplying themselves, meaning they're multiplying their power, their authority, their jurisdiction over things. So all of that is important to understand. And those pillars go further, because beyond the three, in their base imagery, everything is going to revolve around their hidden Kabbalah knowledge, their secrets, their geometry, their hidden mathematics, their, all their signs and symbols that represent that spiritual world and the contracts with it. So, you'll see that the three colonnades will multiply into five colonnades, and they'll call those the five classic architectures in masonry. And you're going to see, five distinct forms of architecture. Well, you know, I'm going to be doing a series um, called Architecture and Altars, and I'm going to, show how they use architecture and the structure of buildings to communicate those contracts. Um, in my coaching sessions, which you can find on kingdomlivingwithjessie.com, I break down the basics of that in my land assignments 1 through 4. In land assignment 4, I begin to show, how the 3-line contract is literally, put right into the structure face front of the buildings that they build. And, that structure, the signs, the symbols, the contracts they put in there will specifically be placed on ley lines, on areas where you have spiritual gates, portals that they're going to want to access. You're going to have in connection to that light, they're going to use architecture with light. They're going to do certain things with sound to, show one another what spiritual gates are there, what entities are they worshiping, what forms of magic can they use in that place, or what forms of magic do they train people to use in the circle groups that they sit in. And all of that, interconnects your architecture. Um, you're going to get your 5 main forms, which they'll give these last 2 different names. But you get your 5 main forms of architecture, but you see that there's more. And connected to those 5 main forms, notice how each of those forms is also recognized by a Roman numerals. Um, each of these 5 break down further. So you have, their symbology when they use, when they're putting things in the buildings and the face fronts, creating their seals, you get each of those representing its own distinct thing, connected to light, sound, and the entity contracts that they're going off of. So they'll also, in music theory, this is going to be called the torus of the fifths, but gets into, how they use light, sound, and the imagery in their contracts between the physical and the spiritual worlds. Um, I like this because this, gets into some of the symbols as I knew it, but it's the same thing, when you break down that symbology, there's some other symbols that they will throw in there with it. Um, you know, that upper layer that you have of that base image, when we're looking here, this a lot of times how you'll see it symbolized is as, a crescent moon facing down. Well, that gets into imagery for their councils. You've got the 4 main councils that they're going to use. You have an overall council uh, called the Council of 300. Part of that council will be established under a contract that looks like a crescent moon. And, these crescent moon shapes are used in their dios, also known as their seas or their dioceses. So you'll see the connection with the councils and under the crescent moons. That's going to get into the imagery like we brought out in the show, The Princes of Jerusalem. I get into, you know, the imagery of the star, which, we see that base star here. We also talked about how there's another hidden star that goes here and how that connects to the seasons, and that connects to their rituals and their ceremonies. And you'll have, those that fall under this main 4 piece star, the northern star, they're going to be bound to these 4 seasonal rituals that they have to attend every year. Then you get the off-season rituals, which fall here, and you'll get those that may attend all 8. Um, so um, you can see how the councils are going to line up with being under different symbols and different moon phases. So that's how they'll interuse some of these layers and the imagery, and those moon phases connect to different pillars, which are going to connect to different sounds. Um, you know, and so everything that they have is categorized by light, by sound. Why? Because that's how the spiritual gates, the places that interface between the physical and the spiritual worlds, how do they access the other dimensions? How do they access the altars and worship the entities that are bound in those dimensions? It goes back to the light and the sound and the operation of the spiritual gates. And, based on their degrees of illumination, when you think about that, they start off at those basics, the Ionian, just learning things in general. But as they become more specialized, as they begin to learn about the different moon phases and different sounds that are operational within those seasons and those phases, that gets to, your first layers. You have your 15, your 30 degrees of illumination, then you get your 60, your 90 degrees of illumination, then you get your 180 and your 360 degrees of illumination, of understanding. Both operating, you have a yellow light spectrum, which is, how things are structured during the day in that light spectrum, and you have your blue light spectrum, which is your night spectrum. So all of these things operating, these switch between, the spectrums, your yellow light spectrum being more connected to your majors in sound, your blue light spectrum connected more to your minors used at night. So all of that, connecting to their learning to open the spiritual doors in day and night, in order to do their deeds that they're going to do, which include temple worship. Um, so, there are different symbologies. Symbols are going to transpose across different things, but they're going to learn to master um, all of those things. And that goes back to, God's law established in Genesis 1, which gets into, the Lord's creation of the 4th day, the sun, the moon, the stars. And God said, "Let there be lights in the sky. These lights will separate the days from the nights. They will be used for signs to show basically times, seasons, and events, the days, the years, the hours. They will be in the sky to shine light on the earth." So God made the 2 great lights, the sun, the greater light to rule by day, the lesser light to rule by night. Now, these get into that establishment. When you think about their symbology, you have the Lord created an encampment for the people of Israel. At the very center of that camp, you had the Ark of the Covenant, God, and his presence. Then you had the 4 priestly encampments, the encampment of Morai there. You've got Moses and Aaron. You have the Kothites here and the Gershonites there. And then you have 3 houses of Israel up north. You have 3 houses of Israel established in the east, 3 in the south, and 3 in the West. Each of those houses representing those who are keepers of certain things. Um, those considered in the lineage of Rachel, the houses of Joseph split into Manasseh and Ephraim and Benjamin being keepers of, these things. Um, so then you also get further in this, um, their symbology. And again, they're going to be learning these signs and symbols. They're going to be learning about the building of God's house, the building of the temple, the treaties, the contracts that they needed for that. Who do they go to, right? And, these stories serve as keys for them. It tells them what are they as they're getting into their circle groups. Um, you know, where where are they to go? So they have to make everything look like it's godly. That's the form of godliness. Um, so in the past episode, we talked about the princes of Jerusalem and how, within their symbols, they communicate, their contracts. This symbol of the justice scales, beyond representing justice, this also is used to represent a header and those two supports representing the gates of Baal. Um, you know, you have this dagger representing, those that are coming out of some of the lower layers here. When you look at their structure, notice how this sword is used with these Elhu of the 9, the 15th, and the 12. Um, so it represents things that they're going to be coming out of. We see the stars in that put into that pentagon shape, representing certain things for them. And all of that's going to get into their constitution, which brings us back to, terms that they're going to use. So beyond the main constitution, which is meant to, ensure our freedoms, it's established to protect our rights and our freedoms, which what does it outline? Our freedom of speech, which is our voice, our freedom of religion, which is the spiritual side of things, our freedom of the press, which is our right to tell or talk about things, and our right to bear arms, as well as our right to due process, and protects us against unreasonable searches and seizures, and protects our right to, due process, a fair trial. Um, but let's look at their other two constitutions. So that's, the main line. That's what's going to be presented is that base, that they're all going to walk that line. They're all going to walk that line, right? That's what's going to be seen. Yet they're aware of the other two constitutions. The first being the Grand Constitution of 1786, which we'll get into, and the second being the constitutions and general regulations of the Supreme Council of the ancient accepted Scottish Rite for the Northern Masonic jurisdictions. So again, we see those terms grand and supreme, showing that it's going to connect to the Brotherhood, the Luciferian Brotherhood, and the Sovereign Military Order at, a quadrant level. This one we're going to read, the other one we're not going to read the whole thing, but let's look at, it outlines their constitution, outlines certain terms that they're going to be bound to, and outlines their rights, their authorities, their jurisdictions. And we're going to see, I brought out some of this in the Princes of Jerusalem episodes where I show how it connects to certain governmental positions as well as we see for those departments within our government the same signs and symbols used, particularly for the princes of Jerusalem. We see that bar of justice as one of the symbols that transposes into the sigils for governmental departments that they're going to operate out of. So let's just read their constitution here. The 1786 constitutions have seldom been published, so the majority of the members of the ancient and accepted right in England and Wales are unaware of their provisions. These are important as they are the guiding rules which all supreme councils throughout the world acknowledge. So again, your supreme councils connected to the lower and the upper councils of the Luciferian Brotherhood and the Sovereign Military Order. They start with a long preface that includes the reorganization of the degrees of the rite of perfection. So that's one of the names that they'll go by, that this is their writ of perfection, right? What's a writ? And which is given in the last chapter. Other parts of the preface are given later. Many of the articles are purely administrative and might appear in any set of Masonic regulations. A complete copy of the articles from the Latin version of the Constitutions is given in Appendix 6. So we're going to notice within this Constitution there are 16 articles. And gets into, we being Frederick, by the grace of God, the King of Prussia, Margrave of Brandenburg, etc., the sovereign grand protector, the grand commander, again, you get certain terms being used showing the position, grand showing a quadrant level. A quadrant commander, a quadrant master, and protector throughout the world of the very ancient and very respectable Society of Ancient Freemasons or United Architects. So architects being another term they're going to use, otherwise known as the order. What is that connected to? Your Luciferian Brotherhood order, also known as your sovereign military order. Order being one of the approved terms, rather than saying brotherhood or sovereign military, they can call themselves simply the order of the royal and the military free art of stonemasons and Freemasonry. To all the illustrious being another term that they'll use for high priests and priestesses, those are going to be your regional leaders, and well-beloved brethren. So the brethren's going to be a term for all those at the lower layers of the system. Now present, let us see tolerance, unity, prosperity. You'll always see this ribbon contract at the bottom of their symbols and everything, their crests, and you'll see 3 or 4 humanitaries that they will declare with it. So that's what that represents. It is clear and undisputable that faithful to the important obligations imposed upon us in accepting the office of protector of the very ancient and very respectable institutions known in our time under the name of the Society of the Liberal Art of Stonemasons or Order of Ancient and United Freemasons, we have dedicated ourselves, as all will know, to cherishing it with our special care. Now here, notice this symbol here, which kind of looks like a little star that you're going to get asterisk, but literally it's got the straight line and the 2 cross lines in it representing, contracts that you have regionally, but also with the 3 of them, you get the 3 line contracts right there, and that code with Samael and Asmodai put in it. New and pressing representations have been addressed to us from every side, and we have convinced us of the need to impose a powerful obstacle in the way of the spirit of intolerance, sectarianism, schism, and anarchy, which innovators now seek to introduce among the brethren. Their schemes are nearly ready. They are either imprudent or wrong, presented under false colors. So think about this. Think about, we get the color of law, right? Colors is one of the way they distinguish themselves. They know the orders, the circle groups that they are sitting in based on their colors, the attire that they wear, the colors seen in their badges, their emblems, which they will approve based on the level, the circle group. It has to all be approved based on their understanding of geometry and the light spectrums, the magic that they're doing. All of that is interconnected. So, they've got groups that will pop up that are presenting under false colors. Their aims in altering the free art of Freemasonry tend to distract it from its objective and must inevitably cause the disintegration and ruin of the order. In view of all that is happening in neighboring kingdoms, we realize that intervention on our part has become inevitable. These reasons and other causes, no less serious, force on us the duty of assembling and uniting all the rites of Scottish Freemasonry, whose doctrines are, as we know, nearly the same as those of the ancient institutions, which have the same objectives, and which, being but branches, again, that term branch is very significant, representing those three colonnades, of of one and the same tree, which really is representing the brotherhood and the sovereign military order. Their Kabbalah magic, their Solomonic magic, only differ in a few words, easy to reconcile. These rites are those known by the names of the ancient rite of Herodom or of Hairdom, of the east of Kilwinning, of St. Andrew, of the emperors of the East and the West, these again being connected to your councils, and the princes of the royal secret of or perfection, of the philosophical rite, and finally the primitive rite, the latest of all. So this gets into, those offshoot colonnades, certain lower council groups that kind of will be placed, overseeing the logistics of some of those and the information as it's passed between different circle groups who are studying the same forms of magic. Adopting, therefore, as the foundation of our beneficial reforms the title of the first of these rites and number of degrees in the last, we now declare them now and forever united in single order, which, professing the beliefs and pure doctrines of ancient Freemasonry, includes all the systems of the Scottish ancient and accepted rite. Again, they seal that part with those asterisks. And so that the present degree can be faithfully and permanently executed, we order our beloved, valiant, and sublime knights and Prince Masons to watch that it is carried out, given at our palace at Berlin on the day of Chelens, 1st of May, and the year of grace, 1786, and of our reign, the 47th, Friedrich the Great. Now you get into the constitutions of 1786. Again, the Latin version is available. And here you have, the Universal Terram Orbis Summi Architectonis Gloria ad Ingenius, constitutions and statutes of the Grand and Supreme Councils, of the Grand Inspectors Generals, the patrons, the chiefs, the commissioners of the Order of the 33rd degree, the last degree of the ancient and accepted Scottish rite, and regulations for the government of all constituaries, councils, colleges, and other Masonic bodies under the jurisdiction of the aforementioned councils in the name of the very holy and great architect of the universe, Ordo Chaos. Now, again, we see that split representing three distinct colonnades. The wording is purposeful in that. And this going back, actually, the AB going back to magic. All of this, they see representing, you've got a mountain here, and these symbols are going to fall into that mountain, representing, again, hidden magic and things that they're doing. With the appropriations of the presence of and under the auspices of His Great August Majesty Frederick Charles II, King of Prussia, Margrave of Brandenburg, etc., very pursuant monarch, the Grand Protector, the Grand Commander, etc., of the Order, the Sovereign Grand Inspectors General, and Supreme Council assembled. So there we see, Grand Inspectors Generals being a term that is also used within our governments, the Inspector Generals. And having gathered, have after deliberation sanctioned the following decrees, which are and ever will be their constitutions, statutes, and regulations for the government of the constituaries and other Masonic lodges under the jurisdiction of the said Inspector Generals. So what we have happened is that many of our departments within our government have been established under these hidden councils, and they get into how can they establish these things, what do they need, and then you're going to have a lot of it run and being placed under the governance of the Inspector Generals, those who are to audit, oversee, and ensure that there's nothing fraudulent supposedly going on in those departments. Well, what really is it? They're not safeguarding we the people, they're safeguarding the brotherhood, right? So their job is to, make sure that we don't find out what they're doing behind the scenes. So we'll notice in this constitutions that there are 16 articles, and that's very purposeful. That's 16 connecting to your 16th degree, which is your princes of Jerusalem. All of that put under a sign of your scales of justice, and you'll see that sign going across in some of those departments, coat of arms and sigils that they use. All the articles of the Constitution, statutes, and regulations laid down in the year of 1762 by the 9 commissioners of the Grand Councils of Prince Masons and the Royal Secret, which are not contrary to the present regulations, are retained and will be observed. Those which are contrary will be abrogated and considered as if expressly abolished. We have Article 2 here. The 33rd degree confers on Masons who are legally invested in the position. Notice that, who are legally invested in the position, the titles, position, privileges, and the authorities of the Sovereign Grand Inspector Generals of the Order, meaning that they are paying money. They're paying their dues, and that's how they keep their compliance, is by their monthly pay-in. The particular aim of their mission is to instruct and enlighten their brethren, to institute among them charity, unity, and fraternal love, to maintain correctness in the work of each degree, and to ensure that this is observed by all members, to ensure respect, and on all occasions the respect and defend the tenets, doctrines, institutions, constitutions, statutes, and the regulations of the order, and especially those of high masonry, and finally to apply themselves anywhere to works of peace and benevolence. But this is their main, their duty, their codes, the code of silence and their code of brotherhood, which says you are to love your brothers, you're to provide for all your brother's needs, as well as you're to cover your brother's sin. A meeting of members of this grade is entitled a Council of the 33rd Degree or Pursuant Grand Inspectors General of the Order, this council being composed as following. First degree, in places correct for the establishment of the Supreme Council of this degree, the most senior inspector is rank is herein authorized to promote another brother to the same dignity after having assured himself that the later has truly merited it by his character, his knowledge, and the ranks with which he's invested, and he will administer the oath to him. All right, so they can minister the first degree oaths. But this is going to connect to some other things. Second degree, these two brothers jointly and in the same manner confer the degree on another brother. So you have the threefold contract between three individuals who can confer their oaths to one another. The Supreme Council will then be constituted, but no other candidates will be admitted unless they obtained a unanimous vote, meaning that all three have to vote them in. Each member giving his vote aloud, stating with the youngest or starting with the youngest, that is the most recently joined. One negative vote among the members deliberating, if the reasons are considered adequate, will reject the candidate. This rule will be observed in all similar cases. So they have to all unanimously agree to let people into their upper level councils, the councils that they're establishing at the lower ends of the council. In the circumstances given above, the two first brethren raised to this degree have the right to the first two offices of the Supreme Council, that is the very pursuant Sovereign Grand Commander and the very illustrious Lieutenant Grand Commander. So that's what they'll be called as they enter into the council, Sovereign Grand Commander and illustrious Lieutenant Grand Commander. Now, let's take a moment here to go back, because when we look, we start to see, some of these terms, once you get past in these councils here, you're going to see terms like you've got chief. That was a term we saw in there. Prince is a term we saw in there. Here's commander. So that's getting up into your 28th degrees. Then you have your inspector, inquisitor here at 31. You've got master of the royal secret, which was a term they used, and your inspector general here of the Supreme Council, your 33rd degree. So that's where, it's talking about. If the first of these officers dies, abdicates, or absents himself permanently, he will be replaced by a second officer chosen his successor from among other grand inspectors. So they have to be a certain level. The very pursuant sovereign will also nominate the illustrious minister of state of the Holy Empire and the illustrious Grand Master of Ceremonies and the illustrious Captain of the Guard, and he will designate in the same manner brethren to fill other vacant duties or which become vacant. Article 4. Every Mason possessing the necessity, qualities, and capacity who is raised in this sublime degree will pay in advance into the hands of the very illustrious treasurer. Again, that term illustrious, connecting them to the brotherhood, and to the regional governance. The contributions of 10 gold Friedrichs or 10 gold Louis, old money, or the equivalent in the money of the country. When a brother is initiated in the 13th, 31st, or 32nd degree, a sum of the same value and kind will be required from him for each step. The Supreme Council will supervise the administration of these funds and will use them for the benefit of the order. Again, they want you to think it's just small amounts that they're putting in here. Each Supreme Council, Article 5, will consist of 9 sovereign grand inspector generals of the 33rd degree. of which 4 at least will profess the dominant religion of the country, whether that's, Christian or Muslim. They'll have a duality in their brotherhood. So they have to, 4 of those 9 have to profess the dominant religion of the country. When the very pursuant sovereign grand commander and the lieutenant grand commander of the order are present, 3 members will be enough to compose the Supreme Council for the transaction of business of the order. In each great nation, kingdom, or European empire, there will only be one Supreme Council of this degree. In the states and provinces which compose North America, either on the mainland or the inlands, there will be 2 councils situated as far as possible from each other. So I get into that in the regional sigils. They've got a middle layer where they'll have wording, and they'll consider, the top wording will be your Northern Lodge, the bottom wording will be your Southern Lodge, and they'll show which of those 2 lodges in the region has more authority. So that's what that's talking about. There will only be one Supreme Council in each empire, sovereign state, or kingdom of Asia, Africa, and it gets into the other areas where they're going to be limited. Article 6, the Supreme Council does not always exercise its authority directly over degrees below the 17th or the Knights of the East and the West. According to circumstances and situations, it will delegate, but its right cannot be waived in all the lodges if councils of perfect Masons, whatever their degree, are hereby required to recognize in those who have received the 33rd degree the authority of the Supreme Grand Inspectors General of the Order to respect their prerogatives and give them the honors to which they are entitled and obey them, and finally to submit with confidence to all the demands they make for the good of the order, in virtue of its laws, of the present grand constitutions, and the authority delegated to its inspectors, whether this authority be the general or special or even temporary and personal. Article 7, every council and every Mason of the degree above the 16th has the right to appeal the Supreme Council of Sovereign Grand Inspectors General, who allow him to appear before them and be heard in person. When it concerns an affair of honor between Masons, irrespective of degree, the matter will be brought directly before the Supreme Council, who will decide in the first and last instant. Now think about that, what does that sound like? What kind of law is that? That's the law that they're operating under, matters, affairs of honor, right? Yeah, think about that. A grand consistory of Prince Masons of the Royal Secret will choose its presidents from among the holders of the 32nd degree, who compose it, but in every case the acts of the Grand Consistory will have no authority until they have first been sanctioned by the Supreme Council of the 33rd degree, which after the death of His August Majesty the King, the very pursuant monarch, the Commander General of the Order, will inherit the supreme Masonic authority and will exercise it throughout the whole of the state, the kingdom, or the empire, which has been in place under its jurisdiction. So you've got inherited positions that they're going to name who's following them. Article 9. In countries under the jurisdiction of the Supreme Council of Sovereign Grand Inspector Generals, regularly constituted and recognized by all other Supreme Councils, no Sovereign Grand Inspector General or Deputy Inspector General can exercise his authority unless he has been recognized by the same Supreme Council and received its approval. Article 10, no Deputy Inspector General, even if he has been admitted and received his patent, or whether by virtue or the present constitutions he is in due time admitted, can confer on anyone the degree of knight Kadash, or other higher degree, or give patents. So think about this. What are patents used for? How are those obtained? And yet you have those being used and utilized under these constitutions. Article 11, the degree of Knight Kadash, or Holy Knights, as well as the 31st and 32nd degrees, will only be conferred on Masons who have been judged worthy, and that is by the presence of at least 3 sovereign grand inspector generals. When it pleases the Holy and the Grand Architect of the universe to call to himself his august majesty the king, very pursuant sovereign grand protector, and commander of the true keeper of the order, each supreme council of sovereign grand inspectors general already regulating, constituted and recognized, or who will in due course be constituted and recognized by virtue of these present statutes, will be and by absolute right legally invested with all the Masonic authority of which his august majesty is now invested. Each Supreme Council will use his authority when it is necessary and wherever it will be throughout the country placed under its jurisdiction, and if for reasons of illegality it is necessary to protest whether about patents or the powers given by deputy inspectors general or on other subjects, a report will be sent to all the supreme councils of the 2 hemispheres. And then you get into Article 13. Every Supreme Council of the 33rd degree can delegate 1 or more of the sovereign grand inspectors generals of the order who belong to it to found, constitute, and establish a council of the same degree in all the countries referred to in the present statutes or constitutions, that they will obey punctuously what is laid down in the 3rd paragraph of Article 2. Let's get into that for just a minute here, because what does that mean? Think about courts, think about Congress, think about dioceses. All of those are considered jurisdictions. All will be established under a sign. They're dios, and so they are able to establish based on these rules and regulations, whether that's a lodge, whether that's going to be a courthouse, whether that's going to be something else, a department within our government. It will be established under a crest, under their signs, their symbols. They'll put it, under the authority and start to place the people who are at the top of that governing over that body as they're going to consider legally, right? What does that mean? It's business. They're establishing something that's going to operate as a business, yet most of these things are also going to be considered 501c3s, departments, so they're established entities, but at the same time, they're separate. They're not all seen as religions, but this is how they're going to see them. The Supreme Council must meet regularly, so they've got in there, what they're going to be doing for meeting regularly. In order to be recognized and enjoy the privileges attached to the 33rd degree, each sovereign grand inspector general will be provided with patents and credentials, of which an example can be found in the ritual of the degree. These letters will be given to him in condition that he pays into the treasury of the Holy Empire the sum of each Supreme Council will decide for its jurisdiction as soon as it's constituted. The said Sovereign Grand Inspector General will also pay a Friedrich or Louis ancient money or equivalent in the coin of the country to the illustrious secretary as payment for his work, for sending the above mentioned letters, and for affixing the seal. Every sovereign grand inspector general will keep in addition a register for his actions. Each page of this will be numbered, the first and last page being so marked and initialed to prove his identity. The grand constitutions, the statutes, and the general regulations of the sublime art of Freemasonry will be inscribed in this register. The inspector will be held responsible for entering all his actions as they occur or risk repudiation or even suspicion. Where do they file these things? Usually it's behind the capstone in the main structure of the building. They will show other than their registers and their patents, and they will inform each other the places where they are both known. So literally the face fronts of the building and behind the capstone, you will have literally these are seen as inscribed in the building. So it gets further. I encourage people to read this because there's a lot of terms, a lot of information in here. You see things where you're like, okay, how are they really operating? What are they really subservient to? In this one, what I really want to point out of all the articles is this one found on page 36, where it talks about the oath of fealty. They're all bound under this oath, and we see it here. I, the undersigned, do hereby promise on my word of honor and swear true faith, allegiance, and fealty to the Supreme Council of Sovereign Grand Inspector General of the 33rd and the last degree for the Northern Masonic jurisdiction of the United States of America, sitting at the Grand East in the city of Boston, Massachusetts, of which the illustrious Henry L. Palmer, Sovereign Grand Commander for the time, is the most pursuant Sovereign Grand Commander and will support and abide by its Constitution, statutes, orders, and degrees. That I will hold allegiance to the said Supreme Council and be loyal thereto as the supreme authority of the writ so long as I continue to reside within its jurisdiction. I will hold illegal and spurious every other body that may be established within its jurisdiction, claiming to be a supreme council, and every other body of the writ within the same jurisdiction that does not hold its powers immediately or immediately from the Supreme Council. Okay, so what's that? Is that we the people? Is that the main constitution that we have, that it's now just established as insuperior under, these constitutions set up by the Supreme Councils? I will hold no communication, whether in Scottish Rite Masonry, with any member of the same, nor allow them to visit any body or rite of which I may be a minister, a member, and I will dispense justice to my brethren according to the laws of equity and honor. Again, that's going to go back to your codes of brotherhood, the code of silence and the code of brotherhood, which says love your brother as yourself, cover your brother's sin. Should I violate this in any solemn vow and pledge, I consent to be expelled from Masonry and all the rites therein, and in any body of the writ, to be denounced to every body of the ancient accepted Scottish Rite in the world as a traitor, and, as a traitor, and may God aid me to keep and perform the same. So, that's their oath that they're going to go by. Now, there's more significance to all of this because when you get into it, you know, you have hidden things. So the last council that, some of the shows that I've done, I begin to bring out like their crest, the imagery that you see in it, their coat of arms, like in, the Jesuit Catholic Church, you're going to see, what looks like these tassels cascading down. At one layer, those tassels for them represent the priesthood. At a whole nother layer, those tassels represent Reichs, um, connected to their Nazism. At another layer, those tassels, layered tassels, represent the underground, the tunnel systems, and their rights, their ability to get through those tunnel systems. At another layer, those tassels are going to be connected to the spiritual gates, the songs, the music. Um, so you're going to get things represented in different ways. Um, you know, so when we see, the Supreme Council constitutions, why are there 104 amendments in that or articles in that? That gets into the connecting, their imagery, their music, going back to those special pillars that they see connected to their architecture and, the operations, the use of the gates. In music theory, the 104 hertz responds corresponds roughly to the G sharp, um, which is connected under the Locrian mode, which when we saw that, let's just take a minute here to go back. You get in your base masonry, they're going to learn these main pillars. If they advance, they'll get into these, and then the really advanced is when they're going to get into these higher layers. So the Supreme Council connecting to things that they understand from these higher layers. So, um, you know, that gets then into, the 104 hertz, which, I'm going to play this here just for a second. I've just picked some random. It's really hard to hear. Um, it's very high pitch, like you really can't hear it. But if I play it just for a minute, you're gonna sense it. If you need to, go to, 104 hertz tone amplitude, um, and there you'll feel when you play it what I'm talking about. So here, let's give it just a minute. This gets into the buildings, the things that, they're going to connect to. When you walk into these buildings, all of a sudden you're going to feel a pressure, a negativity. That's going to be connected to the sounds that they have going that are going undetected within these buildings. And within each building, you can have multitude of sounds. Literally they will layer, like at the corners, you'll have 4 different sounds, and you can go, like if you just walk in, you'll see where you're drawn to, and you'll definitely feel like as if you walk around and just kind of feel, you're like, oh wow, no, that area feels really icky, right? Why is it? It's because they put all these different hertz and tones. They're going to structure these in the buildings that they're working and operating out of. All of this meant to keep certain people out of certain areas and allow them to do their business with certain entities. So here it goes. And again, that's just going to give you a brief little taste of it. So, all of that, again, your Locrian mode is connected to 7 degrees, which gets into your 7th interval above the root. So things at a subtonic level. Our main constitution with the 7 articles is classified under this. Um, which gets into the 7 degrees on the musical scales, and how they classify those things that are subtonic. Um, Subtonic can refer to a form of ammunition or weaponry that travels at a speed slower than the speed of sound. Um, so it's a way that they can weaponize using light, energy, and sound. Um, so basically in their studies, they're learning their degrees of illumination, light, sound, frequency, and based on their layers, they know how to bring these things into the atmosphere as they're establishing, forms of government, things that are going to allow the entities to operate within the physical world. Um, you know, as you get into the other councils, your 16 articles, that is going to connect to your Mixolydian pillar, which when we look at that, you've got your Lydian here. So again, this is going to be your first 5 pillars as you get into that 5th that connects into your Mixolydian area. And that gets into, sorry, that gets into your G sharp tones. So again, you could look at G sharp to look at that. So those that are under your grand council, your grand constitutions, they're going to understand all of the hidden knowledge that's connected to this sound. That's what they're going to be studying, how to control, how to create, how to put this into the environment of whatever they're having governance over. So here, let me play this one for a moment. So again, these are all going to be connected, um, to certain things that they're going to place in the environment that are meant to, set us off, disrupt us, do different things. So here we see, the Mixolydian is also known as your dominant scale. It's a musical mode derived from the major scale, but with a lowered 7th degree. So they hide certain things, like when they're putting those 7 articles in our Constitution, what's one of the hidden messages? They're connecting it to music, to their 7th degree and the Mixolydian mode. And that gets into like that 7th degree, and you get into certain hertz. Look at the same symbol. Notice how, we had the star, that kind of star going the other way, and then we talked about that cross line. Well, what shape does 7 hertz register at? Look at that. 7 hertz registers at that. Um, when we play that, again, this is all below, you can't really hear, but it's all so subtle. And in those images, are there ways to put those images up in buildings? Why do they put certain images? Why do they structure things a certain way? Is, the fact that it's structured a certain way give way for these sounds to be built in and to be resonating just due to the structure of the building, the way that, things are being processed through it. All of this gets into your G7 stuff, which, think about, what do they call, all those towers they've just put up with sound and warfare, right? Your G7 towers, right? And think about, like, they play it in a way where it's not even heard, but these things are emitting things into our atmosphere that then are impacting, that are working for or against us. Um, your 16th also being connected to your hertz there. And notice how you get very similar to that layout we saw in the music theory, right? Um, and their imagery, their flowers, their symbology that they use, um, in all of this, look at how you get things that are interconnected. When they show all the seals of the intelligence community, notice that you've got 16 seals around there. Each of those having their own distinct role, right? But why do they do things in that way? It's not just random design. It's meant to convey pictures. It's meant to convey meaning at these higher levels to them. It's meant to represent their contracts of light and sound with certain entities, and behind it, it gets back to their Solomonic, their Enochian magic, and their hidden knowledge, symbols, music, songs, by which they govern the world through their Luciferian brotherhood, a foreign government, and their sovereign military order, a foreign military. Um, so that's just a brief overview of the constitutions, kind of how they're set up. If you can find them, I encourage you to read them in their fullness. But know that there's a lot hidden in those. There's so much more to their constitutions that they're going to be governed by. That gets into their hidden knowledge. So I want to thank you for joining me for this episode. The constitutions and how that connects to their thrones and their altars. Again, I'll be getting more into this in my series that will be titled Architecture and Altars, and I will be explaining some of this in that as well, and the connection between, you know, the the constitutions they establish, how that connects to certain thrones. Those thrones connect to altars. Those altars connect to certain deities, fallen angels, and entities that they worship and raise up as gods, and that they make allegiance to, because at the end of the day, they are Nazis and they believe that they are gods and they want to usurp the throne of God and become gods. Um, their agenda aligns with Lucifer's agenda, which that's his only agenda, is to usurp the throne of God. Um, so these people believe that they have control over, fallen angelic armies, and work in connection with principalities, powers, and authorities that they worship and sacrifice to, um, as well. So, again, thank you for joining me for this episode of Unveiling the System. And please like, share, and subscribe. Thank you.